Welcome to That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. My name is Caitlin Dawn. Thanks for joining us today. Hello, and welcome to That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. On today's episode, I welcome author Christian Brunner. Hi, Christian.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
I'm really thrilled to have you on. I've been reading your books, Alpine Witchery and Mountain Magic, and I'm really excited to pick your brain. You have a book coming out also that I forgot to mention that I'm anxiously awaiting. It's about the wild hunt and Krampus.
Yes, it's called Krampus, Witches and the Wild Hunt, Alpine Traditions for the dark half of the year.
The wild hunt has been kind of a hot topic recently, so I'm excited. When is that due to release?
So the publishing date is September 8th of this year. There's probably going to be some pre-order available, I guess, sometime late spring.
Awesome.
Llewellyn does that, the publisher. We have the cover done. It's by a friend of mine who is a fabulous artist, Amelia Lennartz. She does a lot of illustrations, and you might have seen stuff of her. She does really a lot of fantasy stuff, and so she illustrated the cover for us. Just to add on to that, we are in the process of talking with Llewellyn, bringing out a oracle deck with all those creatures that we have in that book. Which we have 36 cards, and so there's 29 creatures, 3 Trinity cards, and 4 group cards. So it's all what you see in the book and a little bit more. And yeah, we hope she will illustrate that for us. And I mean, we have to talk with her, of course. So the same group of our authors doing the oracle cards, and hopefully Amelia doing the illustrations for that.
I'm really excited about that because I love all of the mythical creatures and the land spirits. That's great. Will that be released around the same time, or you're still in the works? That's still in the...
Yeah. That's probably a year later.
Okay.
We are about to submit the formal, so that's the submission basically. We're going to send that over to Llewellyn. The concept itself, the illustrations, and not all of them, like Sam, and the whole idea, and then hopefully they will agree to that, and then we can just. It's going to be a little bit of darker oracle card. It's a dark time. Many of them creatures. It's like Krampus, for example, wild, archaic, scary, but also is here to make sure that people don't go too far in being mean and bad during their year. So knowing that Krampus might punish them for that. So there is a Central European German way of be good or else theme to it that we don't have, for example, with Santa Claus. He's like waving his finger maybe, and maybe you get one gift less, but it's not as consequential as having Krampus come and take you with them for a year.
Or the Belschnickel.
Yes.
Santa Claus doesn't carry a switch. I don't think that dark is necessarily scary all the time. There's some beauty to that. Outside of your writing, what does your magical or spiritual practice look like day to day?
My chosen path is actually that of Druidry. I do some morning ritual, usually, mostly peace related, especially now, setting the space wherever I work. I do a tarot card for the day, basically. Often enough, it's like late in the day. It's more like, oh, this is how the day, or why the day went that way. But it's so things like that. And then, of course, we have our 8 rituals during the year. So Imbolc coming up next weekend. Some of them I write the ritual for, this time I'm just going to participate and enjoy the ritual, enjoy the Estetfod, which is sort of the sharing of poetry or song or whatever people bring in, and food, usually a little bit of meat or something to warm. Because my Druid Grove does all the rituals outside, no matter the weather. And so it's going to be a cold one this time.
It's going to be a cold one.
Sure.
Yeah, you're going to need some mulled meat or mulled wine or something to keep warm.
Mm-hmm.
I pull a daily card too. Well, I usually actually pull a rune and a stone every morning, but I do sometimes get frustrated with a message and then pull a card for for clarification.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, you mentioned that you did the last, I think when we were speaking, you said you had written the ritual for solstice. And winter solstice, perhaps? Is that what you
Yes.
said?
Yes.
When you're not researching, writing, or teaching, how do you spend your free time? Do you have any hobbies or pursuits that people might not know about?
No, it's more like that the writing and the spiritual part is not my hobby. That's not really the right word for it because I do a lot and spend a lot of time. But I do have a day job and a dog.
Oh, you have a dog?
And, yeah.
What's your dog's
His,
name?
his name is Fritz, like
Fritz. Nice.
my grandfather. So yeah, my days is filled with day job and then I usually try to write at least a page or two a day. Sometimes, of course, more when I get really in the mood. But sometimes it is just to make sure that I don't fall into any writer's block situation. Sometimes it's just a paragraph and thinking about a million other things that could be written, but not in an hour or an hour and a half.
I just by happenstance, I'm a writer, but for me, writing is much more of a hobby.
Mhm.
And I have writer friends who will disappear in the middle of a function, and I know that they're jotting down notes or something,
Yeah.
the muses have taken them. Do you carry notebooks with you as well?
Yeah, that can happen. I have too much what is called FOMO to ever leave the function. But yeah, often enough, come home and write some notes, and then with the Druid path and all that, there's astrology connected to that. So I do that in my closet behind me. There is a wide range of tinctures that I make myself and salves and so forth. So there's always something to do, and
Yeah.
I like cooking too. So in the book that's coming up, the Compass book, there is a recipe for each of the days that are very traditional things that we in Austria we cook or bake for those days. So that's also a passion that I sometimes cure my own bacon. I have here a bottle of mead fermenting as well. So,
Nice.
all those little things that it sometimes takes a while to actually do it because there's always the hurdle for making this mead and what took months was really actually to get the cleaning material for the equipment and bottle. I have to get that. I have to get that. And finally, I got whatever that chemical is that you need for making sure that only the meat is fermenting, nothing else.
Right, right. Botulism is no fun. Actually, I was a little jealous when you said that you were making mead because I've tried twice now. And
Hmm.
once it was definitely vinegar. I made vinegar. It wasn't great. And then the other time I threw it out. So I think I have more research to do. Maybe I'll have to bother you after this.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't know yet. It's my first time I made meat, and let's see. I'll let you know when
I feel
it's
like
done. Still bubbling.
with your holistic remedies and your because I saw on TikTok that you were creating tinctures and that sort of thing. I feel like you're going to do better than I did. So I'll bet on that. You also on your website it says that you work with differently housed individuals. Does how do
Yes.
your spiritual or cultural practices inform that kind of community work?
I have to admit, especially right now, in the last year and a half, it's been a firestorm. So much so that I really a fire to be extinguished every day. There's something new coming up, so that I don't get to blend them very much.
Hmm.
It's when it's turned on my computer, it's like emails. We have to do this. We have to do that. We have to get money there. We lost money, especially government funding in great amounts, which means, I mean, technically we lose it, but it's actually our the families that we serve that lose the support that we can give them or financial support
Yeah.
directly. So yeah, that's usually just like trying to stay afloat as an organization, and we have for over 100 years,
Oh, that's
more than
wonderful.
20 years. That organization was founded, I think, so shortly after World War One, to help people coming back home and so forth, or losing a lot because the husband, the son, or some died in the war. The families often fell apart, and that's how it came up. And now it's a lot of other families that need a lot of help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough time. It's a tough time to be in that field. I have a lot of
Yeah.
friends who for food banks. I try to volunteer. I haven't been volunteering as much this year because of health issues, but getting back into it. But I just wanted to say thank you for what you do because it's so important.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It is.
Um,
Unfortunately, it is
and
important.
yeah. Yeah, everything is so much, nothing is approachable. No sort of healing path or recovery path is even approachable if you don't have housing. So it's a very important, one of the most important aspects of well-being. So
Hmm.
sure, your books dive deep into Alpine folk magic and its history. They show a deep connection between landscape or regional practices and magical practice. How does the Alpine terrain shape the spells and the rituals? What is different about that type of folk magic?
One of the factors that are and have been and are still very difficult for especially farming in the Alps is that you don't have a lot of flat space. Once you have a certain incline, you can't really grow any crops anymore. So you're more reliant on making hay. Cattle and especially dairy products are a much bigger industry there. And with that, of course, comes this heavy, and back then, like 400 years ago, came that heavy reliance on dairy products, and that paired with the only emerging in the late 18th century emerging understanding of bacteria and hygiene as a factor. Before then, milk just got sour and
Mm,
sometimes very quickly. And the others of the cows and goats and so forth got infected all the time, and people didn't know what to do and why. That too, right? So a lot of folk magic was targeted to either heal these infections, so making sure there's no blood in the milk and other stuff that makes it really go bad very quickly, and B, or thinking that because they didn't know what caused these infections and so forth, that it might be a curse that was placed on the farmers, on that farmer, that the cows became sick, and some of those diseases are contagious, so the whole stable might have fallen ill and so on. So it was very, very important for the families. I mean, it still is, of course, that the cows stay healthy. It's just easier to do that these nowadays, but back then you didn't know what caused it. So the fallback was some witch cursed my cows. Then there was folk magic to heal it. There was folk magic to there's a spell in there to basically turn sour milk back into at least drinkable milk. There's some reverse the curse kind of spells if the farmers had or thought that their cows were hexed in that sense. In an environment, as I said, like the alpine pasture, so bringing the cows up in April to the high pastures, leaving them up there over the summer, bringing them back down in September. That was sort of the routine dairy industry. That the cows don't mind standing on a steep slope. You look at alpine pastures, it's like full with herbs, basically. That's really healthy food that they get there. A lot of grass, and it's rich. And the Alps are in terms of rain in the summer and precipitation. All the weather, the clouds that come from the northwest over rather flat Netherlands and Belgium, France, and Germany, and then they hit the Alps, right? And then the clouds have to rise and rain off. You have a good amount of rain every year throughout the year, making on one hand it makes sure that your cattle always has good food. On the other hand, you do have those flash floods. You do have whole mountainsides coming down. So there's always this dualism between good, but it was also kind of dangerous. And you see that a lot in the magic, the Alps.
I really enjoy your modern adaptation of some of these. There was one that I thought was really interesting about warding off bad weather. There was one where baptismal gown and hang it on because we do. A lot of the older Roman Catholic families, we keep those items and preserve them, or we keep bits of them. We don't
Mhm.
recycle those. I mean, for groups of people that are, Germanic people and people who practice Catholicism now, those traditions still kind of lasted. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. And I think it's so interesting how you preserved it based off of the accounts from the trials, the witch trials, giving your perspective and your opinion about some of them. Some of them there might be a little bit of missing information or something lost in translation, but and really unique to take those accounts and use that to
Hmm.
talk about folk magic and spellcraft. Because we really don't have a lot of written accounts of this sort of thing. It's an oral tradition in most cases.
Yes.
So it does survive orally through local tradition, much like the Germanic practices in Pennsylvania now that is experiencing like a little bit of a resurgence here. And preserving the essence of those is important. When you were doing your research, were there any stories that kind of stood out that surprised you or challenged your understanding of magic?
Well, more way that trials were held when reading through those, some pattern emerged, I would say. And one of them was that the witch trials were kind of tied to the socioeconomic situation of that area. I have not studied anything like in France and Spain and England. So if in fact the situations were very different. But what I did find was that the poorer you were, basically, the more likely you were accused of witchcraft, and the more likely were sentenced to death. There is a good correlation, a strong correlation, I should say, between those two. On the other hand, it's only one person, so it's not statistically relevant, really. But we have in that time frame, we have a woman, and it's important to mention that her gender in that sense. She was very, very rich, and she was nobility. And she hired witches to make sure that her fields are yielding a lot of crops, and her competitors, the farmers around her, don't. And the witches got caught and sentenced to death, and she was not even charged. And she was known to also do some witchcraft. So there was definitely a class disparity in there that I found that interesting, that sometimes went against what we know, and some other data really shows that women were targeted more. At the same time that your social standing could override basically what normally would be thought as a woman you accused as a witch, you're sent to the fire. So when I went through probably 360 to 400 witch trials, not all of them are in the book because most of them, nothing was revealed. Right? They were accused, but no actual spells were revealed, just in those that are in the book. The rest is just nothing was said that is actually usable for folk magic or doing folk magic today. So in those, and in total, there's 1,023 individuals that could be identified, and 45%, so almost half, were they would be referred to as beggars and vagabonds. And so there was a huge segment of the population that was basically homeless. They went from farm to farm begging for food, asking the farmers to be able to sleep in their stables overnight. And sometimes they did some folk magic for them, weather related, again, livestock related, but also sometimes, and that's also in the book, the farmers wouldn't give them anything, and then they would curse the farmers. And then the farmers would accuse them and then go to court. And so there's definitely something was revealed in that sense, basically, that poverty was definitely a huge factor in the witch trials.
I think that that's pretty common. I'm not an expert by any means, but of course I know about the local witch trials and then the ones that occurred elsewhere. There was that bias, of course. Depending on the political climate, someone of
Mhm.
nobility might be targeted or their case was thrown out, depending on the situation. One thing that also stood out to me when you were studying Alpine and Celtic practices, how much do you think of our perspective has been shaped by the lens of Romans or other early chroniclers when they were writing about these people?
But we don't see actually much writing by the Romans about Alpine Gaul. Pliny and writing about Pliny about, I think, the southern, what was now southern France, like Marseille and so forth. Those even going up to Anglesey, right?
Okay.
There's not much going on with in terms of the Romans writing about the Alps. I mean, a little bit, and this is also why we barely have anything left. I sometimes make the joke that there was a language that was called Noric. That's one of the kingdoms, the Celtic kingdoms, that I speak that language fluently because I know every single word of that language. There are two words left,
Oh,
so
what
it's
are
easy.
what are the two words?
How to put Spock Droid. It's a name more, but it's one of those names that sort of more describe the person. We can, of course, only reconstruct from the better known Old Celtic languages. So that was spoken in Gaul, not the Gaelic languages. So that's all we know. So unfortunately, so much has been really forgotten, destroyed, overlaid with the Germanic tribes coming down through the Alps using the pass says over the Alps to get to Italy, for example, and the warmer climate. And some of it is only known through missionaries from Ireland, so monks from Ireland that came and tried to teach the Germanic and Celtic tribes in the Alps Christianity.
We owe them a lot because those Irish monks certainly recorded quite a bit for us. It's always handy. Are there any misconceptions that we carry today because of those historical narratives? Because things were erased and then they were painted with a certain brush in some cases. Because you mentioned a lot of the older Celtic cultures were painted as barbaric, when in reality, in comparison, maybe not so barbaric compared to some of the Christians.
Yes, yes, definitely that way. I mean, the Romans had this kind of attitude towards anyone who is not a Roman, that they are barbarians and don't know what they're doing. Although the word itself just means they're mumbling into their beards because they couldn't
Is that
understand.
what that means?
Yes.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
that's amazing.
the Germans and the Celts, they probably had quite some facial hair, and the Romans were standing there, and the Germans and Celts they would talk in their language with them, and the Romans wouldn't understand a word, right? And so they were mumbling into their beards. So of course they're already in its meaning that they don't even have a typical language. Of course they could talk with each other. My understanding is that until about 400 Common Era, the Romans actually tried to Christianize the Celts in the Alps, but failed miserably. And it was about a 200-year period of, then they left. And then when, especially St. Columban, so that Irish monk came to the Alps, he found folks worshipped him still Woden, for example. I was very upset about that because he saw them brewing or having a huge kettle with beer that they wanted to sacrifice to Woden, and he toppled that over, which is so wrong on many levels because it's beer and
Kind of a
and
bummer.
but he was very proud about it and said you can't do that. You cannot worship your old gods. What's interesting, and then why that comes back to mind is because when I started writing the new book about the wild hunt, is what I was trying to figure out, why do we have lore in the Alps where Woden leads the wild hunt? That's what it is, the Alemanni. So they settled the very west of Austria and mostly Switzerland. Their probably main god was Woden. Thus the wild hunt was led by him. In Celtic stories, in the Alps, it's actually a woman who leads the wild hunt, Mother Percht. So you can already see the differences here. We have stories in a very small pocket of the Alps that was not even conquered by the Celts when they assimilated with the folks in the Alps, that they kept. So that small pocket, they kept what is best described as a matricentral society, so where the mother is the center of the family. The old stories really tell of that when you read them. You have to peel a few things off the stories, but in the core you can see that the mothers and the daughters were really the ones who saved the tribes and communicated with the local gods and goddesses and so forth.
Good for the people in that region though for holding out as long as they did. Because lots of people always reference Wales and how, they say it was the last Druid stronghold, but it's good to know that there were other regions as well. I don't know enough about, in fact, now I want to visit Austria because I think it's fascinating. And for some reason, I'm grateful, but for some reason, I was really highly ranked in Czechia. I don't know why, but yeah, it's right there. So I might as well visit both, right?
Mhm.
So you were talking about the Galatians. And so I do have a question, if you don't mind, about Renaissance magic. So Renaissance magic included both, of course, learned alchemy and folk practices. How do those Renaissance ideas about witchcraft intersect with the Alpine folk traditions that you've studied in this?
That's a very good question. Because I would put my thinking is on that is that when you look at the folk magic as it was practiced in the Renaissance, was already very heavily influenced by Christianity,
Mm.
and so you don't get so much influence from that older culture into that folk magic. I couldn't pinpoint a spell or something going into that direction. Much more though in lore, so in folk tales. There you can definitely see. You can almost sometimes almost witness how back then new Christian faith kind of clashed with what people really were used to,
Yeah.
thought is important. Pretty much all what we do still in Austria or in the Eastern Alps and some in Switzerland as well is very much related to making sure that the sun comes back after the winter solstice so that next year we have a harvest again. That is not, although they place Christmas into that very moment in time, we make sure that everything is purged, cleaned up for the winter solstice, so that the new year can start fresh, and the new year really starting on December 24th or 5th, with more meaning the new cycle of harvesting. And you can actually measure nowadays how seeds start to not grow but change their chemical setup or something, or biochemical setup with the sun now falling, and it's minuscule, right? The angle that the sun rays come, but it starts there. In reality, the growing season starts on December 25th. So minimal that you have to really have good instruments to measure it.
Sure.
But somehow people knew.
Well, that's
And
fascinating because, so I wonder if you're describing, and I don't know a lot about gardening myself, but the cold stratification that's needed for some seeds because they do have to sit over winter in order for them to be able to germinate and grow then in the spring. I wonder
Mhm.
if there is some sort of, I'll have to ask my herbalist pals if there's some sort of tell, if you're cold stratifying seeds that you can see. That's interesting. So there are still lessons from that period that are relevant for
Mhm.
practitioners today, and we can kind of glean some of these and adapt them for modern times. All of our practices, like the foundations of Celtic, Druidic, Gallic, like any of those practices, are about developing, learning from someone, but then
Mhm.
developing your own perspective. And I think that's so important. And any good teacher will lead you in that direction as well, right? I mean, because how are you going to get to know the gods if you don't have your own perspective about them?
Yes, absolutely. And it takes a while, I guess, to understand all the lore and the stories about, for example, the gods.
Mm.
To really, at some point, be in a position where you can say, "Oh, all of what I had to learn." And back then, the bards, for example, had to learn in the hundreds the epics that were important for at least for that tribe and for their culture by heart. So not by reading and writing it down, but by heart. And at some point, you form an understanding of what's going on, what's the meaning is. Only then, I would say, they were allowed to add their own opinion to it. That then became part for the next generation to learn by heart and develop. So, I mean, theoretically, you can write something down and then rewrite it every generation, and I mean, science does that. We have learned so much when you think about one of my pet peeves when they found out that, about cholesterol and fat in food and fat in your blood and how dangerous that can be. The understanding 90 years or 80 years ago was very different than what we have today, with good fat and bad fat. Back then, all fat was bad, and then started giving out that low fat milk that is
Mm.
even worse. So we do that all the time, even with written. They're not stories, they're knowledge or something like that. But back then, maybe the understanding wasn't that advanced in that sense that people thought when once it's written down, it's over. Basically, it's it halted its development for forever.
I'm studying Brauerei. I have there are a lot of regional authors and people who are really focusing on making sure that those traditions don't go by the wayside. It has been experiencing a little bit of a resurgence because we have people, Patrick Donmoyer, Jack Montgomery, Silver Ravenwolf, Robert Schreiber, who wrote a book with wonderful individuals who have contributed a lot of practices and a lot of knowledge to this, preserving those oral stories. It just makes a lot of sense to me because with those practices, again, some people regionally call them powwow practices, but we've been shifting to call it Braucherei, which is a little bit more sympathetic to the original Germanic roots. There are things that are verboten that they would not write down. How are you going to cure or heal someone if you're going to look at it from a scientific perspective? If they take this practice and they move to another country where the herbs might not grow, there might be a different herb that they have to use and that sort of thing. So you have to kind of adapt it and meet the land and those traditions where they're at.
Is that I have a book here, something a very good friend that has Pennsylvania Dutch on one page and then the English translation on the next, but it's all remedies and spells basically. It's called like a very good friend or something like that.
A long lost friend?
That one, yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So at some point I got that book and I was just reading through it, out of interest, but also linguistically out of interest.
Yes.
And for someone who grew up with German as the native language and learning it in school and standard German that you learn in school with all the grammar and so forth, it is very hard to read actually if you just silently read the words and what does it mean, because they're A, old expressions, and B, they were phonetically written down before German had a grammar.
Okay.
In the dialect, the Palatine and
The
Swabian,
Pennsylvania Dutch?
yeah,
Yeah.
dialect. And that dialect is basically built into how it's written.
Yeah.
And so I read it out loud to myself and immediately sounded like an aunt that I have in that area. So when I'm on the phone with her, she talks exactly how I read that book. And I can't do that accent without just now. I wouldn't be able to do that. When I read that book, I sound like my aunt from
That's interesting.
near Stuttgart.
I honestly was just sitting around with Silver is I don't think given enough credit for her uncovering the different patterns, like the cadence and the tone and the different chants, how they tie into like the old Swedish
Mhm.
chants and the dialect and the old Germanic chants because we were reading an old Swedish manuscript that someone had finally gotten a copy of, and one of them sounded exactly like one of the modern when I say modern, I mean, 1900s or late
Mhm.
1800s, the prayers that were used to blow out a burn, to help the cows, or to even to curse people. But a lot of those were not written down for, the fear of getting caught because they didn't want to get caught cursing. And a lot of times they would find corresponding kind of, Christian prayers to use in lieu of that to protect themselves as well. But the tone and the kind of rhythm was the same. That's so fascinating. I love this stuff. It makes sense
And
too.
you probably have stumbled over a couple of those in Alpine Witchery, where just the first two lines in the spell, and sometimes one of the spell is really long. O Herr Jesu Christ, ich stehe hier auf diesem Mist. Which means, oh Lord Jesus Christ, I'm standing here on a pile of dung. And then he goes on and on and on about pushing away weather over the mountains so that it doesn't come to the valley and destroy the crops. And so it's sometimes that's really like, yeah, whatever. I, say those two sentences in the beginning of my spell, and then I just go on as usual without the Christian deity. And it sounds very much like just to fulfill a requirement. That person who claimed that having done that spell actually went free in his trial, although they found over 60 magical items in his house, and he recites, like freely recites spells that he did in court and still goes free because all of those spells mention Jesus or were done in within the Christian framework and not the devil. That was important. And it was for the good for the community. So they said, well, a little bit of magic for the community not drown in the next rainstorm is fine. You're good. Go and keep on doing what you do. And that was like a few years after the Witch Hammer came out. So that particular trial, and but he could prove basically that he didn't call upon the dead. But you can really you can really see that it was just to make sure that it sounds like it's a prayer and it is in reality.
There's no witchcraft going on here whatsoever. Move along.
Yeah.
It's just a prayer group.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah, nothing to see here. But because of your book, I was rereading Hexcraft, and then that led me down that rabbit hole. And I do have a copy somewhere of Long Lost Friend by John George Homan, and it is hard to read for me. I don't speak German. I'm learning it as part of my studies. Your new book entitled Krampus, which is part of the Wild Hunt tradition. I would love your perspective on the Wild Hunt. I know we talked about it a little bit. Why do you think that it's enduring?
Oh, that's a good question. I think still people feel and know that something is going on in this darkest period of the year. And there's so much sort of kind of things are conflating there. So as I said, like it's the shortest day. It's the sun, quote unquote, dies. We want the sun to come back to make sure that we have a harvest again. When you're going to think about the 4 stations of the sun and the year that basically creates in our thinking, 365 days and so forth, the timekeeper seems to have been the moon, right? So people were orienting themselves and saying, okay, I meet you in a fortnight, or I meet you, in a week. And those are all moon-related time, or is it moon-related time frame, right? And it doesn't match. Right? We don't have the moon cycle with 29 point something days and 360 days. It does not work perfectly together. So there is a time when the sun year and the moon year have to kind of be consolidated, and that's happening in this, or it's said to be happening in those days after the winter solstice. It is a time in the Alps of winter storms, so really like howling wind kind of storms, avalanches. It's the nature is kind of in turmoil, and I think people kind of were not only aware of the danger, but also had to kind of have this danger manifest in something they could communicate with, beg for mercy or something like that. And that's what we see sort of in the Wild Hunt. In lore, it's always described as a plethora of sounds like wind howling and hoofs of a horse and ravens cawing and bears growling, right?
Growling.
Yes. You hear that behind you and coming closer. And if you are out, which you shouldn't be at that time, all you can do is like jump into the ditch next to the road, face down, and hope that they go over you. Right. So this force of nature, this dark force of nature that you cannot really describe, and that's what it is. The Wild Hunt is never, in old lore, it's not described as particular entities. It's more sound and movement. But at some point, when you encounter them, some figure manifests out of that cloud of sound and movement. Right? And that's usually, that could be either Mother Percht, right? That could be sometimes Odin, that you often you only see them heading up the Wild Hunt But when you encounter them, it's the wild hunter, the wilde Jäger, as we call him, often accompanied by a dog with more than one head, and sometimes a male pig person, the
Okay.
Saurusdog. So out of this not really thing that doesn't have a form manifests, and usually then the wild hunter asks you to do something for him, lest they have to take you with them. And there were weird things. For example, he would give you a leg of a horse and challenges you to keep it fresh until next year when he comes and pick it up again. And this is from a time when there was no refrigeration and definitely no freezer, right? So in those stories, the person then goes to everyone in the village and asks them, what should I do? I cannot keep that fresh. And nobody has an answer, not even the priest, parish priest, but someone tells them then to go to someone who lives alone in the forest, who knows the old ways, blah, 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 basically the witch. In some ways, it's an old smith. There's smiths, but we're also like usually outside of town and kind of witchy, right? And they would tell that person, let's say the witch, to wrap it in linen and bury it in a pile of dung, and that would keep it fresh. I mean, absolutely, like scientifically not possible, right? But it's kind of what to do, and people would do that, and lo and behold, they dig it out next year when the wild hunt and present it to the wild hunter, and it's still fresh. And then they faint or something and find a gold coin when they wake up in their pocket. So basically saying, keep the old faith or find the old faith. They know what to do, even if it's totally whacked out, basically, and or does not make sense. Adhere to that, and you will survive. Right? That's where you find often these old things. They're metaphorical, obviously. It wouldn't be done that way, but it is basically trust the old ways, trust the magic, and I think that's still in people's psyche, even if you don't think about that to that extent that you start reading lower and then try to understand it. It is something that's in ourselves. There's a magical time, and then magical time will come again every year. If you adhere to old knowledge, you will be able to survive and not be taken by the wild hunt and so forth. That's one element of it. Later on, you hear a lot about those are souls of people and variety of types of souls. Sometimes it's like soldiers who were cowards, or sometimes it's a train of souls of poachers, so like people who hunt without license. And then at some point it became kids who died before they were baptized. So you have with all these sort of outlaws, not kids who died before they were baptized, but not outlaws and stuff, but they're not part of our group. So and therefore they're the wild hunt. And then there's always something probably that kind of matches the folks or the souls of the folks that were not really one of us, right? And so therefore they become the wild hunt.
I think it's interesting. It's an interesting time for those to kind of bubble up and become trendy, because those concepts have become a little
Mhm.
bit trendy. So even though you've written about it, you've described it, and I know, have you ever personally experienced or worked with the energy of the wild hunt yourself?
No.
No?
um,
You're sitting here, right? And you're not, you haven't been whisked off, so that makes sense.
yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, that's it. Insofar, it's a little bit newer for me, also
Okay.
because I started to get really into that in the research for that current book. There's something, for example, that it's called Kreisstehen, which means you stand in a circle on certain days. One is on Sylvester, which is New Year's Eve, and one is on Walpurgisnacht, but you can do that any day, but those are really the big. So you days for that. So you would draw a circle or three on a crossroads and stand in it during the witching hour, and with some quest on your mind that you want to get a vision of related to that, to your question. Right? And in the one on in the winter, it is said that if you step out of it, you will be caught by the or taken away by the wild hunt. So the wild hunt will like seduce you or push you out or something. They want to get you out, but they cannot get into the circle. But once you step a foot out, you're busted basically. And so Christian itself, I have done, for example, that to basically didn't apparently didn't step out of the circle. So elements like that, yes. Of course, one of the big rituals during that time is fumigating or staining or whatever you want to call that your whole house and if you farm all the stables and every building. So you go through them and shoo out all old energy and cleanse the space and so forth. So these things, yes, they're not directly wild hunt related, but definitely things that we do traditionally in the fauna. Or, for example, on the night from January 5th to the January 6th is what we call the Pertelnacht, which is a night dedicated to Mutterberg. And she would come to your house with her entourage, which is basically the wild hunt. And if you have your dining room table decked with white linen and a piece of bread and a glass of milk, feast there, and as a thanks would bless your house before they move on, because that's the last time or last night that they are present, and then they go back into the outer world. So those things, yes, I still do have my bread on the table and some bowls.
I've heard variations of that. That's really cool. There was
Yeah.
one of our traditions is to make sure that your house was clean, because if your house isn't clean,
Mm-hmm.
then you won't get punished, but you will. They don't say it outright, but it's alluded to.
Who doesn't say that don't get punished?
I guess they don't specifically say how you'll be punished, but they do
Oh yeah.
insinuate that you're going to be punished, really. And it's funny because
Yeah.
even my husband, he's not, he doesn't participate in all of this all the time. And now it's a tradition. He'll run around still and make sure there aren't things on the ground and that sort of thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why these remain. It's a powerful tradition.
It's definitely cleaning up, purging your home to make it ready for the next year.
Yeah. And the seining or the smoke cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of herbs do you use when you smoke cleanse?
So I use mostly mugwort.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's my go-to. I have some mandrake root that I sprinkle in, not too much. Juniper berries, sap, so from conifers.
Okay.
So that,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
like frankincense is one of them from a particular conifer in the Middle East. I don't like the smell. That may be having to go to church too much, Catholic church growing
I
up, or
understand
it's
that.
just a
Yeah.
very strong. But I collect throughout the year. I collect dried up pieces of conifer sap and keep it for that.
I never thought to collect my own. That's really silly of me. But that's basically what I use for seining or smoke cleansing is the juniper and the mugwort and sometimes rosemary or things like that. Just things that smell nice but also have those properties that cleansing and clearing. And there's some scientific
Mm-hmm.
reasoning behind that as well because of getting rid of bacteria in the air. And it's funny when you were telling the story about the horse leg, preserving the horse leg. There were some very interesting remedies that have recently been, I think that people are running out of things to experiment on, but they found a recipe with bile and a few other really odd things that you would never expect to be curative that cured MRSA. It was so powerfully
Mm-hmm.
potent that it actually cured MRSA and some of the other superbugs. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's important that we preserve this, right?
absolutely. Yeah. Give it to remember that was always an issue when my son was wrestling.
Yeah.
That was a big scare all the time. Like, what's that little spot on your
Yeah.
forehead?
Oh, all the time. Those mats
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
yeah.
know. I think it's the material they're made out of. They hold on to things, but
Hmm.
so modern fascination, why do you believe there's a resurgence in the fascination behind folk magic and lore and all of these ancient stories?
I think it might be either a continuation or a resurgence of the same that happened in the 19th century with the Romantic movement. That was sort of the answer to the Enlightenment. Everything went scientific, and the Romantics were like, oh, there must be something else. And yeah, and so they went into that, so in paintings and theater pieces, romantic literature, and so forth. So as sort of a counterbalance, now that we are in a technology is so prevalent in our society, and even more so now with AI and so forth, that you need a counterbalance. You need to connect with what you're as a human, as a mammal on this planet, are have been connected to for millions of years. I mean, when you just the position the time we have technology that we have now, right, with hundreds of thousands of years of using herbs and remedies like that. This is a blink of an eye, what we experience right now, right? And it's so fast that I think we need this counterbalance to slow down a little, slow your roll, my kids say. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. It's just too fast, too techy.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I think people are, I know I am looking for a way to reconnect to the things that we really crave as human beings as well. I think that's part of it as well. So are there any resources that you would recommend to folks before we wrap up? Any books that you would recommend to understand some of these concepts better?
That's unfortunately a little bit difficult insofar as my resources are all in German. Yeah, so just thinking. I mean, I'm reading, for example, right now a book just that goes back to Krampus and this era, and I don't actually know how to pronounce his name. I wrote Al Wiedenauer. He wrote a very interesting, very good book as an U.S. American about Krampus and that time of year, and very detailed and very well researched. So that is definitely a good source for that particular. But for witchcraft itself, the very very old book. It is in English. For example, it's called Life of Saint Columban. This one is printed in 1914, but I think it's older. So it's still about him. So I was looking actually at a book of his actual writings, which might not be available in book format, but this is goes very close to that what he was writing, and his encounters with pagan folk in the Alps. So those are interesting sources. Lengthy, and it's so much more than that. There's only really a chapter about the Swedes and Alemanni in the Alps. The rest is mostly German. Like the books by the Brothers Grimm, they might be available in English. And so, since I have the ability to read all them in their original language, I don't even look if they're available in English. But as a reference book with some grain of salt, the books by Brothers Grimm are a good source as well to look for.
Yeah, talk about dark stories or parables. They're great too. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I also really think that your works are a good recommendation, especially your TikTok was really informative. You do some really interesting lives and you talk about different traditions. You did one recently. Was it Krampusnacht? Is that what you did it for, or was it for another event?
Yeah, I had a couple on campus. Yes.
My pronunciation is horrible, but but yeah, that was wonderful too. I've learned a lot from you, and I really do appreciate it.
Okay.
And I'm really looking forward to your next book. But it's been lovely talking to you
Okay.
today, and I
Same
appreciate you
here.
coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.